On the 40th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, a handful of survivors of this monument to Nazi evil returned. Eva Kor, with her twin sister Miriam, found a record of their past. Eva and Miriam were 9 years old and in the front row when the Soviet soldiers liberated this death factory years ago. And they found among a few thousand survivors a large group of twins. Twins who underwent inhuman medical experiments at the hands of Dr. Joseph Mengele, the camp surgeon at Auschwitz, who was known as the Angel of Death.
Just to be free from the Nazis, that did not remove the pain they have inflicted upon me. There might be another way that survivors can heal themselves. I have found one way. Forgive your worst enemy. It will heal your soul and it will set you free. I, Eva Moses Kor, a twin who survived as a child Joseph Mengele's experiment at Auschwitz 50 years ago, hereby give amnesty to all Nazis who participated directly or indirectly in the murder of my family and millions of others.
It's improper. It's improper. I should be permitted. I should be asked. How can you speak in the name of the people who are not alive anymore? I mean, I shiver when I think of it.
Eva Kor. I am Eva Moses Kor, and I am a realtor in Terre Haute, Indiana. I got into real estate, and I couldn't get anybody to hire me. Nobody would tell me. They said, we don't have any more jobs. And I would look in the paper. Twice a year, I would call all the companies. One company finally told me, don't you know why nobody wants to hire you? I said, no. They said, because you have an accent. I said, what? Well, nobody can understand you. I said, my goodness, I can't believe that. After all, I survived Auschwitz. You mean to tell me that I cannot sell real estate? I grew up in Transylvania with my father, my mother, two older sisters, and my twin sister Miriam. When I was 10 years old, I was sent with my family to Auschwitz, Birkenau concentration camp. Our train was pulling in, and then it stopped. Then finally the doors opened and a mass of people poured out. As we were standing here, an SS was running from that direction, yelling in German, Zwillinge, Zwillinge, which means twins. We did not volunteer any information. He approached us, looked at Miriam and I. We were dressed alike. We looked very much alike, and he demanded to know if we were twins. At that minute, another SS came from this direction, grabbed Miriam and I to the left. My mother was pulled to the right. We were crying, she was crying. As we were being pulled in that direction, I looked back and I saw my mother's arms stretched out in despair as she was pulled away. Come on, come on. We are going to be late. It's a nice size lot. I don't have a buyer for it, but I sure would like to sell it. It's practically maintenance free.
It's marvelous.
Yeah. I love to sell real estate. It's a good balance because there is a lot more to life than just Auschwitz. That is beautiful. How old is the house? I don't think about it every day, but it has changed my life forever. Nothing was ever the same. Crown molding, and nothing will be ever the same. Well, that's a good day to dip in the pool. It's a place where I lived between life and death. The first night, we were marched to the barracks. High above the camp, there were huge smoking chimneys. I could see glowing flames day and night. I said to one of the twins, because they were all twins there, I said, well, you say that they are killing our parents and all the children are dying in the gas chambers? I said, well, we are children too. And so she said, yeah, but we are being used in experiments by a doctor by the name of Mengele.
Joseph Mengele was a brilliant and ruthless Nazi scientist who arrived in Auschwitz in 1943. He may have chosen to go to Auschwitz because he felt there he could do the freest amount of experimentation with the most limited constraints. For those who were interested in genetic research, Mengele was regarded at the forefront of German science. Now, if you have people whom you perceive to be racially inferior at your disposal, and they can be made subservient to the creation of an ideal race, then you feel empowered to pursue that, and you feel grateful for the environment which allows you to pursue it.
Dr. Mengele was like drunk with the possibilities that were granted to him to find guinea pigs on healthy human beings and to do whatever he wanted to.
The reason they experimented on twins is because you have a wonderful control group. If you deal with identical twins, you can say that their biological makeup is identical, their sociological makeup is virtually identical. So you have one factor, which is the factor that you introduce into the equation. And Mengele's ambition was equal to his ruthlessness.
After a visit to this lab, I was injected with something that made me very ill. So I was placed in a barrack that was filled with the living dead. Mengele came in with 4 other doctors, looked at my fever chart and said, 2 Wochen to leben. She has only 2 weeks to live. I refused to die. I made a silent pledge that I will do anything within my power to prove him wrong, to survive, to be reunited with Miriam. For the following 2 weeks, I was between life and death. And I remember waking up on the barrack floor, crawling, because I found out that there was a faucet with water at the other end of the barrack. And as I was crawling, fading in and out of consciousness, I would keep telling myself, I must survive. I must survive. Would I have died? Miriam would have been taken immediately to Mengele's lab, killed with a phenol injection to the heart, and then Mengele would have done the comparative autopsies. Again, I triumphed. I spoiled the experiment, and I survived. After 9 months in Auschwitz, the war ended and we were liberated by the Soviet army. That's Miriam and me right in the front as we were filmed, marching out between the barbed wires on the day of liberation. No one else survived in the family. After the war, Miriam and I went back to Romania for 5 years. Then in 1950, we succeeded in getting our visa to Israel. I was 16 years old when I arrived, and I slept the first night there without the fear of being persecuted for being Jewish. And that was an interesting experience, just to be able to like yourself because you are a Jew. I lived in Israel for 10 years. In 1960, I met another Holocaust survivor by the name of Eva Kor. After 2 weeks, we were engaged and married. Then in June of 1960, I came to Terre Haute, Indiana, where we have raised a family with 2 children.
Want to hear me describe my mother in one word? Unhesitant. And that's a good and a bad thing. She doesn't question herself. She thinks and she acts. And I don't know if that comes from having survived or if that was part of her personality from before, but she's a doer, you know.
When Rena and Alex were little, they wanted grilled cheese sandwiches like some of the other kids that they visited would get. And I said, well, I can't afford to buy anything to make a grilled cheese sandwich. So I said, well, maybe I could figure out an idea.
Growing up from the time I was little, I always knew that, my parents were different.
So we called it iron sandwiches. See how nice it comes out? If there is a will, there is a way. And all that ingenuity, I think, did come from surviving. Iron sandwiches.
My dad is your typical survivor. If you were to look in the dictionary for typical Holocaust survivor, you would see my father. Obviously, growing up in Terre Haute, Indiana, my sister and I were not around a lot of Jewish people, let alone Holocaust survivors.
I was very troubled. Nobody really discussed much. I had 2 little kids to raise, and everything around me seemed to be so complicated, so painful.
Halloween was always a big problem. We would have people soap on our house or, common Halloween pranks. Most parents just, let it happen. And my dad would tend to say, well, let's, leave them alone and they won't do it again. And my mom's attitude was totally different. My mom would literally run around and chase these people. And these kids, they were all my contemporaries. It was very embarrassing. I can recall coming home, it was Halloween, and we had swastikas in our house. And my mom would her thoughts would immediately go back to, 1944.
These scars follow us. And we never really know where it catches up with me. The fact is, Miriam and I never talked about Auschwitz until 1985. We could not cope with it. Even after I moved to United States, Miriam and I were very close, and I always think of Miriam more as I was her mother rather than her sister, because I always felt responsible for her life. In Auschwitz, Miriam was injected with something that stunted the growth of her kidneys. And as she became a grown woman, that got from bad to worse. I didn't let her die in Auschwitz. I couldn't let her die in Tel Aviv. So I donated my kidney. When the doctors were running out of solutions to help her, they would say, well, it sure would be wonderful if we could have the files to know what she was injected with. Well, so I hear something like that. I cannot do very much at that time except try to think, well, where do you look for Mengele's files? And that became an overwhelming passion to locate those files. I just didn't know where. And I searched out books, people who were there. I wondered what happened to the other twins. Are they having any problems? When I formed the organization, hoping that through that and the publicity, that people who knew more about what happened to Mengele's files would come forward. And as Miriam got gradually worse, it became more urgent. On June 6, 1993, I came home from a real estate open house, and I listened to my answering machine, and it said in Hebrew, I am very sorry to inform you, your sister died. And that was it. So I called immediately my brother-in-law, and I said, okay, the first thing I do, I get a ticket and fly to Israel. He said, don't bother. There is no way you can make it. The funeral is in 10 hours, and we are not going to wait for you.
And you weren't being in Israel when she died?
No, I was in the United States, far away, far away. When she died, she actually took one kidney of mine with her. I have never buried any member of my family. And I wanted to touch her. I wanted to know how she felt. And he said, don't bother, he can't wait for you.
ברוך אתה אדוני, אלוהינו מלך העולם, אשר יצר אתכם בדין, וזן וחלחל אתכם בדין, והמית אתכם בדין, ויודע מספר כולכם.
After Miriam's death, I was even more determined to find out what we were injected with.
After my aunt's death, my mom was very upset, very confused, mourning. And I think that her sister dying more than likely led her to try some other things that maybe conventionally would make sense. And I think the result of that being that she met Dr. Munch.
I remember from a documentary that there was a Nazi doctor by the name of Hans Munch. And he was the only SS officer to be acquitted after the war. Many prisoners came forward to testify that he had saved their lives. He knew Mengele, but he was not involved in Mengele's experiment. I got his address and telephone number. 2 months after Miriam's death, I met with Dr. Munch in Bavaria. The whole idea of sitting down with an SS doctor and talking to him was mind-boggling. Anytime I thought about a German, not a Nazi, I would say, I hate those Germans. And when you say, I hate those Germans, there is a feeling inside your gut that you hate them. Hello, Dr. Mark. I am Eva Kor. This is
Suzanne Savarai.
I wanted to show you some pictures, okay?
Yeah?
Show you how I looked when I went to Auschwitz. This is a picture before we were taken to Auschwitz.
Yeah.
Before.
That's Rio de Twins, yeah.
Everybody dead.
Yeah.
Everybody dead. This is me here. A7063.
Yeah.
And this is the way we would sit sometime for many hours, and they would do all kind of research.
How long had you been in,
10
research?
months.
In research?
10
from-
months.
10 months,
yeah.
He's under Sturmführer. It's
To my great surprise, he treated me with kindness and respect.
von Auschwitz.
What I am wondering, some of the twins today
Yeah.
are sick, as my sister was very ill
Yeah.
and she died. I myself was injected with a deadly germ. Did Mengele mention any of the experiments that he was working on?
Aber hat über seine Versuche mit niemandem gesprochen, nicht wahr? Mit niemandem. Er hat ja sehr guten Kontakt mit den Häftlingsärzten gehabt, nicht wahr? Mit vielen. Und auch mit denen hat er nicht darüber gesprochen.
What have you been doing since the war ended?
When the war ended, yeah, I came back and I had been very, very depressed.
Depressed?
Yes. Alle Erinnerungen an Auschwitz waren so, dass ich keine Freude hatte, keine große Freude hatte an meiner Befreiung.
Did you see the gassing?
Sure. It's my problem.
And when he said to me that this was a nightmare that he lived with, I was absolutely flabbergasted that Nazis had nightmares about Auschwitz. I said to him, you know, Dr. Munch, I'm going to Auschwitz to celebrate 50 years to the liberation of the camp. Would you please come with me and sign a document at the ruins of the gas chamber? And he said yes.
She said, well, he's going to go with us to Auschwitz. And I said, how are we going to do that? Because I thought, I quickly thought, you've got a lot of survivors there. It's going to be the 50th anniversary. And you got a Nazi doctor. And so I said, well, I'm not sure if you know what you're getting involved with here. The Israeli Mengele twins were very angry.
And she brought him to the crematorium. There was very much opposition about it, very much. It was not tactful.
I, a former SS physician, witnessed the dropping of the Zyklon B in exhaust vent from the outside the gas chamber. It was important to me to prove to the deniers and the revisionists the effects of the gas that there were gas chambers at Auschwitz. By the assigned doctor. And it was signed by a former member of the SS. I felt a very strong need to thank him. One day, I said, well, what if I give him a letter of forgiveness, a simple letter from me to him? It was immediately clear to me that this would be a meaningful thing for him. A friend of mine at Eastern Illinois University, she said, so Eva, you are forgiving Dr. Munch. Well, that's very good. How about forgiving Dr. Mengele?
We were in one of the gas chambers, and another reporter said, well, we understood that you're forgiving Dr. Munch. Would you forgive Mengele? And that was definitely it was in a gas chamber. So I think maybe that started her thought process on what does that mean.
So I thought about it, and the feeling that I had the power to forgive that God of Auschwitz, me, the little nothing, the little guinea pig, made me feel very good inside. And so if I forgive Dr. Mengele, I might as well forgive everybody. 50 years after liberation, I, Eva Kor, in my name only, hereby give amnesty to all Nazis who participated directly or indirectly in the murder of my family and millions of others. Because it's time to forgive, but not forget. It's time to heal our souls.
And that's pretty much where a lot of the Israeli Mengele twins didn't want to have anything to do with my mom.
I don't know whether you noticed, there are many people who don't want to talk to Haven for this reason.
All of me is one big ache. So, can my body forgive? Can my soul forgive? I forgive, but they can't.
Most of my fellow survivors are so hurting that they do not have the ability to even understand what I am talking about. And so many of them will die without ever feeling free from that pain.
I think that forgiveness made Eva stronger, personally. When she forgave, she realized that she had power as an individual.
When I wrote my declaration of amnesty, I still wasn't exactly sure what I was doing. But once I read it and signed it, the feeling of complete freedom from all that burden that pain has inflicted upon me. It's a life-changing experience to be free of that pain. I had no idea that I had the power to forgive a Nazi. No one could give me that power, and no one could take it away.
I mean, I know that's how my mother feels, and I think on a certain level, I don't quite believe it yet. Even, I mean, as close to her as I am, and of course she's not in any way being dishonest. So I think it's still kind of hard for me to believe.
In June 2001, we were invited for a conference in Berlin held by the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute, the scientific institute that was in charge of our experiments. They were in charge of Mengele. And they invited us to apologize for using us as human guinea pigs. This was the first time that any German organization has apologized to the Mengele twins.
Ladies and gentlemen, in the name of the Max Planck Society and in my own name, I want to tell you how deeply I regret that you had to suffer so terribly under the crimes inflicted upon you by German researchers in the service of a perverted ideology. As German scientist, I feel shame and I feel guilt about all this.
We had no idea that Dr. Merkel would ask us, the twins, for forgiveness.
And I want to ask you, and through you, all such victims, for forgiving for all that has been done to you. We are very, very sorry.
Many of the twins became outraged. I felt that they were wrong and I had to speak up. I am aware that many of the survivors are angry. I am sorry that they are. I am not talking in their name, as I hope that none of them talk in my name. I have already forgiven the Nazis. So your request for forgiveness has already been done from me. It is an act of self-healing. And I offer that is available to every survivor if they want to heal their own pain.
You seem to be making a case for forgiveness under any circumstances simply because of the effect that it has on the forgiver. But needn't there be some criteria met that the forgiveness is coming from a position of remorse and perhaps a position of strength rather than weakness, like the idea that the person is back has again the opportunity to commit the crime that they committed before, but they restrain themselves?
The victims need to heal themselves. The victimizers have to take responsibility for what they have done. Right. So there are two parts to it. But
you haven't made that a precondition for you forgiving them.
No, I have not, because I don't want to be the victim for the rest of my days.
But then now I'm confused. What is forgiveness? What does forgiveness mean? Does it mean not allowing the person to occupy a place in your mind and that way you can liberate yourself? Or I always thought forgiveness meant that you can understand why the person did this and you can sort of feel sorry for them and comfort them. So really, what is forgiveness? A separating of yourself or a joining with the perpetrator?
I am not convinced that it is our place or our duty to forgive. We are not gods. And frankly, I don't think that we owe anybody forgiveness. Justice, yes, justice we should seek and forever seek. But forgiveness, it's not our place.
You want to prove to the world that you can heal yourself by forgiving to people. And I say I cannot forgive, first of all, because I can't forgive. Secondly, because I don't have the permission to forgive.
Who has to give you permission?
What do you mean, who cares? 6 million, a nation of 6 million were perished.
You mean your parents have to give you permission to heal your own heart? That's ridiculous.
You know what? If I were to give permission, I would immediately think of my parents, what they would have said. Immediately, I'm telling you.
Does she think that living without pain would betray the memory of her loved ones?
I should deny to myself that I've gone through what I've gone through. I should deny to myself that I don't have any parents. How can I deny that my parents were taken, gassed, and have been thrown to mass graves? It's not out of my mind, never. I can honestly say today, up to date, that I am unable to smile deeply from my heart. I do not know how to enjoy things. And it feels so awful to say, but my children even said it. You don't know to be happy. But forgiveness. In a family, when a child does something and a parent forgives, it's a matter which is not being talked about anymore, and it's being forgotten, and it's as if it didn't exist. And this is exactly what may happen in this case.
I have forgiven the Nazis, okay? And you know that. And you keep saying over and over again, and it makes me angry, that I am forgetting. I have gone all over the world. I lecture everywhere. I have a museum. I have every penny that I have extra goes into that museum. Is that called forgetting?
Eva,
is that called forgetting? Welcome to Kendall's Holocaust Museum. My name is Eva Kor, and I'm a survivor of Auschwitz. Before I begin,
when she told me she was going to open a Holocaust museum in Terre Haute, I was thinking, how is that going to work? And and she described the space to me, and I think I saw it when it was empty, and it was like this little strip mall store, and I almost thought it was going to be laughable, to be honest. But it's, I don't even know how to describe it. Teachers love bringing students there. It's a real educational tool. I think the city loves having it here. It's a really valuable thing.
With the opening of the Holocaust Museum, Kor and other survivors of Nazi lab experiments can show visitors the color of hatred in black and white. They can also give them a first-hand account of just how powerful that hatred can be.
They've had over, I believe it's 15,000 visitors in the last 8 years. They have high school kids, college kids, middle school kids that come to hear about the Holocaust.
Everything you do in your lives, everything we do in our lives, it's like a ripple in the lake. It touches the lives of many people, and it has far-reaching effects.
This is Action 10 News, WTHI.
A little piece of history is lost tonight.
A fire ripped through the Kendall's Holocaust Museum in Terre Haute just after midnight last night. There is evidence of arson. Police are treating the case as a hate crime.
The policeman said, Mrs. Kor, I need to inform you that there is a fire at the museum. I said, a fire? Everything is gone. They have destroyed everything.
The fire was in the middle of the building. On the north side of the building, the door had been knocked out prior to our arrival. At this time, the fire is under investigation.
We put in so much work. We put in so much work and so much love and so much care. Cup. It's a lot more charred than ever been in Auschwitz. But the cup survived, here it is. These pennies were collected by students, and the idea was a penny for each victim that died in the Holocaust. Forgiveness, I think I will work on that. I will work on that. Right now I'm looking at too much destruction. To really say, well, I forgive you, but I am not hateful. I rather am just very, very sad inside. Very, very sad. In the memory of 1.5 million children and my whole family that died here in Auschwitz.
At some point, survivors won't be around to tell the story. A lot of people say the Holocaust never occurred, and if the survivors don't tell the story, then in my mind, then the second generation must tell the story, because at some point in the future, there won't be any survivors left, and we're the next link.
It was a very, very busy crematorium in Gestapo. Very busy. Well, it's probably the place that my parents died in. I have never been here while I was in the camp. If I would have been here, I wouldn't be here. I always try to visualize my mother and the last moment that we saw her. It's a cemetery that I visit when I come here. After forgiving the Nazis, a huge burden of pain was lifted from my shoulder. Now I can go into the camp, I can touch the barbed wire, and it's no longer going to kill me. So I am now a free human being. Wow. What a reception. I am very, very pleased, excited, and honored to be here tonight. I have heard all the proclamations and speeches, and I can tell you that the mayor and the committee who organized this unique event for you and for me are to be congratulated, have done their work superbly, and I am more than just impressed, I am very touched. I know that you've watched the film, and my lecture is divided in 3 parts. Part 1, how I survived Auschwitz. And you know some of it because you have seen the film. Part 2, the lessons that I have learned. And part 3, I am sure you are interested to ask me some questions. It was the dawn of an early spring day, 70 years ago. Our cattle car train came to a sudden stop. I could hear a lot of Germans yelling orders outside. Inside the cattle car, we were packed like sardines, and I could see nothing but a little patch of gray sky through the barbed wires in the window. In the cattle car, we were about 100 people, including my father, Alexander Moses, age 44, my mother, Jaffa, age 38, my older sister, Edith, age 14, my middle sister, Elise, age 12, and Miriam and I, who were only 10 years old. As soon as we stepped down onto the selection platform, my mother grabbed my twin sister and me by the hand, hoping that as long as she could hold on to us, that somehow she could protect us. That selection platform, which I measured in 1995, measures 85 feet long by 35 feet wide. There is no other strip of land anywhere on the face of this earth that has witnessed that many millions of people being ripped apart from their families forever. We stepped down as my mother was holding on to us. A Nazi was running, yelling in German, "Twins, twins." I looked around in trying to figure out what that place was. And maybe 10 minutes I was standing there, and I realized that my father and my 2 older sisters disappeared in the crowd. And we were holding on to Mother really tight. We did not answer the Nazi because we had no idea what worked in that place. He demanded to know from my mother if we were twins, and my mother hesitantly asked, "Is that good?" And the Nazi nodded yes, and my mother said yes. At that moment, another Nazi came, pulled my mother in the right direction. We were pulled to the left. We were crying, she was crying, and all I remember seeing her arms stretched out in despair as she was pulled away. I never even got to say goodbye to her, but I did not understand that this would be the last time that I would see her. And all that took 30 minutes, Miriam and I no longer had a family. We were all alone, holding on to each other, crying, and we did not know what would happen to us. We became part of a group of little girls, all twins, between the ages of 2 and age 16. There were 13 sets of little girl twins on our transport, and one mother, by some miracle, was permitted to stay with her 7-year-old daughters. We knew her. Her name was Mrs. Chengeri, and my mother used to shop at their store, and the 2 mothers liked to compare notes about raising twins. Our group was led to a huge building, to a processing center. Our clothes were taken away, and we sat most of the day naked, without really knowing what would happen to us. At times I thought that this must be a nightmare, and if somehow I closed my eyes and opened them again, the nightmare would disappear. But the nightmare did not disappear. It was late in the afternoon when our processing began. We, the twins, were given short haircuts. The mother's head was shaved. Our dresses were returned with a huge oil-painted red cross on the back. The mother was given striped prison uniform. Then they lined us up for registration and tattooing. When my turn came, I decided to give them as much trouble as a 10-year-old could. 4 people restrained me with all their strength, 2 Nazis and 2 women prisoners, while they heated a gadget that looked like a writing pen with a needle at the end, and they heated the needle over the flame of a lamp. When the needle got hot, they dipped it into ink, and then they burned into my left arm, dot by dot, the capital letter A-7063. My twin sister Miriam became capital A-7064. Auschwitz was the only Nazi camp that tattooed its inmates. My husband is a survivor of 4 years in Buchenwald. He does not have a tattoo. And when you will see me close up, you're welcome to look at my tattoo. You might think that it has faded. Incorrect. It was always like that. When I compared notes with my twin sister Miriam in 1985, she said that in addition to creating a general confusion, I beat the Nazi holding my arm. I am sure I was capable of it, but I don't remember it. After all, I was raised to be a nice girl. And as we know, nice girls and nice boys don't bite. I must have blocked it out of my mind. Once we were processed, we were marched throughout the camp, and we arrived at our barrack, a modular wooden horse barn, filthy and crude. I have never seen anything filthier in my life. Miriam and I were given a bunk bed on the bottom that was covered with a thin straw mattress and a filthy blanket. We have not slept or stretched out in almost 4 days, so I thought maybe it would be something we wanted to do. But human beings cannot function after such a terrible, horrific day that we had. And I kept tossing and turning, and as I was tossing and turning, I noticed something big and dark moving on the floor, and I counted them. And when I got to 5, I jumped up screaming, "Mice! Mice!" A girl from the top bunk bed said to me, "Silly kid, these are not mice, they are rats, and you better get used to them because they are everywhere." And they were. So now we couldn't even try to go back to sleep because we were scared of those rats, so we went to the latrine. And as I entered the place, there on the filthy latrine floor were the scattered corpses of 3 children. I have never seen anybody dead before, but to me it was clear that that could happen to Miriam and me unless I did something to prevent it. So right then and there, I made a silent pledge that I am sure saved Miriam's life and mine, that I will do anything and everything within my power to make sure that Miriam and I shall not end up on that filthy latrine floor, that we will actually survive and walk out of this camp alive. From the moment I left the latrine, I did everything instinctively, and I did everything instinctively right. I had an image in my mind of Miriam and me walking out of this camp alive, and I never let go of that image until the day we were liberated. Our daily routine, we were awakened every morning at 5. By 6 o'clock, we were outside for roll call. After roll call, we would go back to the barrack for Dr. Mengele's daily inspection. He wanted to know every morning how many guinea pigs had. Then he left after he counted us, and we received breakfast. Breakfast at Auschwitz was nothing more but a brownish cup of liquid they called coffee. At noon, if we were in the barrack, we would be given a white gooey stuff that looked like cream of wheat, except we couldn't spoon it nor swallow it. So I am sure it was not cream of wheat. At night, we would be given a piece of very dark bread, about 2.5 inches, but that tasted okay, and that filled my empty stomach. After 3 days in Auschwitz, I realized what the routine was, and that I could sleep at night even though I didn't eat anything and I was hungry. So this way I decided to save my bread at night so I would have something in the morning. But next morning, my bread was gone, stolen by those huge rats. So I had a very difficult decision to make every night. Should I eat my bread tonight and have something to eat, or should I gamble and maybe have something tomorrow morning? The Nazis could have given us the bread in the morning, as they did with the inmates who were going to work, but we were not even given that much help. To give you a little description of my feeling and state of mind there, we were huddled in our filthy bunk beds, crawling with lice and rats. We were starved for food. We were starved for human kindness, and we were starved for the love of the mothers and fathers we once had. We had no rights, but we had a fierce determination to live one more day, survive one more experiment. We were used in a variety of experiments. In my case, I know of 2. One, we would be put naked in a room Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for up to 8 hours, and they would measure, compare my body parts to Miriam's and compare them to charts. These experiments were not dangerous, but they were very demeaning, and even in Auschwitz, I couldn't cope with the fact that they reduced me to the lowest form of existence. So the only way that I could cope with it is by blocking it out of my mind. On alternate days, on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, we would be taken to another lab that I call the blood lab. They would tie both of my arms to restrict the blood flow, take a lot of blood from my left arm, at the same time, give me a minimum of 5 injections into my right arm. Those were the deadly ones. After one of those injections, I became very ill with a very high fever, a fact I desperately tried to hide. Because the rumor in Auschwitz was that anyone taken to the hospital never came back. So I did not want to be taken to the hospital. The next visit to the blood lab, they no longer tied my arms for blood taking and injections. Instead of that, they measured my fever, and I knew I was in trouble. I had a very high fever. Both my arms and legs were swollen and very painful, and I had huge red spots all over my body. I was taken to the hospital. The hospital was another barrack. but it was filled with people who looked more dead than alive. Next morning, Dr. Mengele came in with other 4 doctors. What amazed me even then, that he never ever examined me. All he did, he looked at the fever chart and he declared, laughing sarcastically, he said, "Too bad, she's so young. She has only 2 weeks to live." I knew he was right, but I refused to die. And I made a second silent pledge that I will prove Dr. Mengele wrong, I will survive and be reunited with my sister. For the following 2 weeks, I have one single clear memory. I remember crawling on the barrack floor because I no longer could walk. I was crawling to reach a faucet at the other end of the barrack that had water in it because this barrack was not even allocated water. People were brought there to die. And as I was crawling, I would fade in and out of consciousness, and I kept telling myself, even in a semi-conscious state of mind, I must survive, I must survive. After 2 weeks, my fever broke, and I immediately felt a lot better. It took me another 3 weeks before the fever chart showed normal, and I was released and reunited with Miriam and the other twins. But the happiness of our reunion was short-lived. Miriam looked very sick, and I couldn't understand what happened to her. She looked like one of the living dead. And the way I can describe it, people, in order to survive Auschwitz, we had to have a little bit of luck or a guardian angel, and we had to have an unbelievable will to live. Once people gave up the determination to live one more day, you were very close to dying. It was that easy to die. And those people who have given up, they would just stare into space aimlessly. So when I got back to the barrack, Miriam was sitting on the bed, staring into space, and I was shocked. I said, "What on earth have they done to you? What happened to you?" She said, "I cannot talk about it. I will not talk about it." And we never talked about it until 1985. In 1985, I asked her again. I said, "Miriam, do you remember when I was taken to the hospital?" She said, "Yes." I said, "Well, what happened to you while I was in the hospital?" She said, "Well, for the first 2 weeks after you were taken away, I was kept in isolation with Nazi doctors studying me 24 hours a day. They were waiting for something to happen. I don't know what that was, and I don't know if it happened or it didn't happen." Well, it was the same 2 weeks that Mengele said I would die. I told her I spoiled the experiment. I survived. So it didn't happen. Would I have died? Miriam would have been taken to Mengele's lab, killed with an injection to the heart, and then Mengele would have done the comparative autopsies. I spoiled the experiment. And Miriam was not killed either. In Auschwitz, I think somebody or the mayor or somebody already talked about it, they used 3,000, mostly children. The estimated number of survivors is 200 individuals. I asked her what happened to you after the 2 weeks were up. She said, "I was taken back to the labs, injected with many injections that made me very sick." After the war, Miriam was always weaker than I was, and we lived for about 5 years in communist Romania, but I wasn't a very good communist. Well, I had a little group of about 30 pioneers. At the beginning, I thought they were wonderful because they had the best slogans: freedom, brotherhood, equality. and freedom. That sounded to me so good. So I joined the Youth Communist Party, and then I became a leader of the Little Pioneers. And on a May Day in 1948, I was 14 years old. We went to a parade in the morning. I took my pioneers. We had a lunch in the park at noon, and then they told me to take my troop to the torch parade at night, where I thought it was too much parading. The children needed to study for tests, and I had a test next day. So I sent everybody home, and I went home myself. And then I was called into headquarters next day. And when I told the Communist Party leader that I thought it was more important to study than to go to one more parade, he hit the table. He said, when you are in the Communist Party, you do not think. You follow orders. I said, well, I don't like your party. And I want out of it. I want to resign from it. He said, well, we'll kick you out, and then you cannot attend any school in Romania. And I thought to myself, at age 14, I still needed to learn more and improve my mind, so I stayed reluctantly. So in 1950, it took us 2 years to get our visas to leave Romania, and we arrived in Israel. In Israel, we were for 2 years in an agricultural school with children from 30 other countries who were orphaned by the war. And then we were drafted into the Israeli army. Miriam studied and became a nurse, and I was sent to the engineering corps and stayed there 8 years, reaching the rank of sergeant major. In 1957, Miriam got married, and in 1960, she expected her first baby, and she developed severe kidney infection that did not respond to any antibiotic. The doctors couldn't understand it, but in 1963, where her infections got worse, they really studied Miriam, and they found out that Miriam's kidneys never grew larger than the size of a 10-year-old child. I begged Miriam not to have any more children. I said, you have 2 children, that should be good enough. But Miriam didn't listen to me, and she had a 3rd child, and after the 3rd child was born, her kidneys started to deteriorate. By 1987, her kidneys have failed, and she needed to go on dialysis or have a kidney, a transplanted kidney, where she didn't really want to live on dialysis. So I donated my left kidney. We were a perfect match. The transplant was done in Israel, near Tel Aviv. At that hospital, they have been doing kidney transplants for 10 years, and they had 2,000 survivors. All of them were given anti-rejection medication. None of them developed cancerous polyps. A year after the transplant, Miriam developed cancerous polyps. The doctors were very puzzled. They couldn't understand it, how that was possible. They said that something in her body that must have come from the experiments in Auschwitz combined with the anti-rejection medication to create the cancer. They kept asking me and Miriam to find our files. I have done everything in my power to try to find the files. I protested in Washington, D.C., the Capitol Rotunda. I was arrested and roughed up, and they tore my right rotator cuff. I went to Israel. I protested in Israel. I was willing to go anywhere to try to find our files. Miriam's situation got worse, and by 1993, the cancer metastasized everywhere, and Miriam died June 6, 1993. Going back to the camp, I want to just talk about one important thing, that as a 10-year-old child, I functioned and coped completely differently than teenagers and grown-ups. I thought that the whole world was a big concentration camp. that everybody in the world lived like I lived, in miserable condition, without parents, starving to death, guarded by Nazis day and night. That is the way the world was, until end of August, when an airplane appeared over the skies of Auschwitz. It was flying very low. And on one of the wings, I could see the American flag. That was my first sign of hope that somebody was trying to free us. And hope in Auschwitz was in very short supply. The air raids continued and increased greatly until in November, end of November, all the experiments stopped. We had 4 air raids a day. And then one day, they told us after the evening meal, everybody out of the barracks, we are taking you deep into Germany to protect you from the fighting. My idea was that I didn't like the Nazis when they were winning the war because they were mean. I figured they would be even meaner now that they are losing the war, so we stayed in the barrack. Next morning we woke up, and when we opened the barrack doors, all the guard towers were empty, all the Nazis were gone. We were on our own for maybe 9 days, and there were about 8,500 people who remained behind. The grown-ups cut the barbed wire so we could roam around the camp to find food, to organize food. Organize in camp language meant stealing, actually, but I never call it stealing. And I was a pretty good organizer. We organized bread, water, and blankets. One day I was in the kitchen, and I heard the strange sound of a car as I loaded up with quite a few loaves of bread. When we went outside, I saw an army vehicle like a jeep. 4 Nazis jumped up, took out their machine guns, and they began spraying bullets in every direction. The last thing I remember was the barrel of the gun from about 3 feet from my head, and then I faded away. I woke up sometime later, and I tried to feel my arms and legs, and I could, so I thought maybe that's the way it is in the other world. But as I looked down on the ground, there were piles of bodies everywhere. I reached out to one of the girls, and her body was ice cold. And this is when I realized that I was still alive. I raced back to the barrack where Miriam was watching our belongings, and I told her what happened. We were sad that people were killed so close to liberation. And then we wondered, why did the Nazis come back? And we found out in the middle of the night, they blew up the gas chamber, the crematorium, the Canada building, and they were actually trying to eliminate all the evidence. Our barrack was on fire. Flames were shooting from the roof. We couldn't stand the heat. We walked outside, and the same 4 Nazis were waiting for us, ordered us to march. And anybody who could not walk fast enough was immediately shot. So we arrived in Auschwitz I, 600 people less than we left Auschwitz II. They couldn't take us any further because the Allies were outside the city limits. Heavy fighting was raging in the area. For the next 9 days, we arrived in Auschwitz I, January 18, 1945. For the next 9 days, fighting was going on. I had a big problem in trying to find water. So I went to the nearby river. I lowered a container tied to a string after I broke the ice. And when I looked up across the river bank, I saw a little girl about my age. She was dressed in beautiful, clean clothes, braided hair with ribbons. And what really blew me away is the fact that she was carrying a school bag. That was my first realization in 9 months since I arrived in Auschwitz, that there was a real world beyond the camp where children looked like children and even went to school. She looked at me. I was dressed in ragged clothes, swarming with lice, and the only school I was attending was the School of Survival. A few days later, everything was quiet, and we thought this would be the day we would be free. Late in the afternoon, on January 27, 1945, about 4:30 p.m., a woman ran into the barrack yelling at the top of her voice, "We are free! We are free!" Well, that sounded wonderful. But I couldn't see anything, and I wondered, what was she basing her statement? I looked outside, there was nothing going on that I could see. So we went downstairs from the building, and I stood there maybe 30 minutes because it was snowing heavily, and I couldn't see very well. At a distance, I could see lots of people. They were wrapped in white camouflage raincoats. They were smiling from ear to ear. And the most important part, they didn't look like the Nazis. We ran up to them. They gave us chocolate, cookies, and hugs. And this was my first taste of freedom. For me to realize that Miriam and I were alive, that we have triumphed over unbelievable evil, that my little promise to myself that first night in the latrine became a reality. And that was an unbelievable experience. I want to tell you a little bit of inside information. You saw the film and the liberation film, and you see that Miriam and I look pretty chubby. The reason that we look so chubby, we were on our own for about almost 3 weeks, and as long as there was bread in front of me, I had great difficulty in stopping it to eat. So Miriam and I blew up like little balloons. After the liberation, the camp was liberated by the Ukrainian unit of the Soviet army. They came into the barrack and they drank a lot of vodka and danced some Russian dances. Next 2 days, I think, they surveyed the camp, and I think it was the third day when they told us to put on the striped prison uniforms and asked us to march between the 2 rows of barbed wire fences. Most of the children did not want to put on the striped uniforms. I said to Miriam, "It's so cold outside, let's put these clothes on. We'll have another layer." And I think that is the reason that we ended up in the front. This liberation film, as it's known, it was not really taken at liberation. It was a staged liberation event. But I'm very glad that they filmed it. At least I know how I looked. And it took me, when I wanted to see how I looked, I studied frame by frame of the liberation film for about 6 months with magnifying glass. And then I recognized Miriam in one of the pictures, and I said, that chubby girl next to her must be me. So that is the way I discovered it. I want to thank you all for listening to my story. I hope that not only you remember the fact that the Holocaust happened, and it happened to many people, but I'm more even interested to share with you my life lessons that I learned. I call them life lessons because I learned it from my life. Life lesson number 1, never ever give up on yourselves or on your dreams. I did not know how to survive Auschwitz, but I didn't give up on life, and I tried everything, and here I am, 69 years after the liberation of the camp, 70 years after I was taken there. And particularly when I look at young people, and I'm sure there are quite a few of you young people here, even though, because the lights are not on in the auditorium, I only can imagine. And as I look at you, I realize I actually remember growing up is very hard. And I know it's very hard even if you live in the United States, even if you have loving parents, which is very important, and even if your parents are wealthy enough to buy you the latest crazy designer clothes, jeans with holes in them. Even then, every single one of you young people wonders, how on earth will I fit into this big, big, mixed up world? I can tell you one thing, that if you give up, nothing will happen. But on the other hand, if you keep trying and hammering away, your wonderful minds will come up with answers that will work. I want you to please remember that there is always hope after despair. And there is always a tomorrow after disaster. And if you don't give up on yourself and on your dreams, I guarantee to you, you are going to achieve them. Life lesson number 2. One of the reasons, and people often ask me when I give a long lecture at the museum, what made it possible for Adolf Hitler to rise to power? And therefore I studied that question seriously, and there are lots of reasons, but I will name the first 2. Number 1 reason that Hitler was successful in rising to power was because of a very bad economy called the Great Depression. Unemployment in Germany was 38.5%. Hitler promised his fellow Germans that he will improve the economic situation in Germany, and everybody was willing to listen to him. But once he rose to power, he ignored it, and he decided to blame it, use prejudice and scapegoating, blame it on the Jews and other minorities. Why the Jews? Well, the Jews have been used as scapegoats in modern history for centuries, and nobody objected to it. But as I look around in the world today, prejudice is rampant. And I must confess to you that I am prejudiced. I am prejudiced in particularly, I don't like the way young people dress. So there are some more mature Orients here, right? I do not understand. When I was a child going to school, we used to wear uniforms. Now I see large groups of students coming to the museum. And even the ones I saw this afternoon earlier, there was every color of the rainbow. Some wear shorts and flip-flops. Others wear long pants. Others wear, and their hair is long, bushy tails. I don't know. There is, I think, from what I understand, I might be wrong, but this is what I understand. They are very much influenced by Hollywood, movies, and rock stars. And I thought about that. If I were a famous movie star that young people would try to emulate, I would wear decent clothes, clean clothes. I wouldn't flaunt my boobs or my tush. As I see Madonna, Miley Cyrus, Beyonce, and there are a few others. They all flaunt everything. And I am annoyed with that because they are very wealthy, they don't need the money. They are very famous, they don't need to make a name for themselves. They are good looking, So why don't they just wear decent clothes? Don't they realize that they are a role model to young women? That is a disgrace to me. And all the young women who want to emulate all these flaunting movie stars, I'll tell them, please don't do it. Wear decent clothes. Instead of trying to be sexy and flaunt your body parts, concentrate on improving your mind and your inside, because this is the most important thing. So I don't like all these things. About 15 years ago, I was invited to speak at the local high school, South Vigo High School, and I am heading to the auditorium, and in front of me are 3 young men with baggy pants. Now there is a style. And I have lectured now for 21 years, and I have never seen that before. Their baggy pants, the crotch was the height of the knee. They had to hold on to the pants with one hand. The bottoms were shuffling and cleaning the hallway. And as I was walking behind them, when one of them dropped a book, and then he had the audacity to bend down and pick it up. I saw places where the sun never shone. I was so embarrassed in my school. And then I got angry because I realized that my Vigo County School is supported by my tax money. So I went up to the teacher who invited me, and I told him what happened, and I told him that these 3 young boys must be all bums because they look like bums. And why would anybody want to look like a bum unless they were drug addicts? So he told me that they were very good students and they have never used any drugs. I was shocked. And so, but I realized that I know that I do not like these things. That is not going to change. But that I have to take the time to get to know each person before I pass judgment on them. Because behind those baggy pants or behind that long, wild hair that so many guys seem to like, there might be a very good and interesting person. So maybe I should take the time to get to know them. And if I do that, and judge each person on their merits and content of their character, that I can make a difference in prejudice, one person at a time. And that is what I work at it every time. Life lesson number 3 that I want to share with you: I have forgiven the Nazis. I have forgiven everybody who has ever hurt me. If anybody would have asked me 20 years ago today if I was going to forgive the Nazis, I would have told you, please find a really good psychiatrist and have your head examined. I was a very good victim. What does it mean to be a very good victim? I was angry with the world. I hated the Germans, the Hungarians, the Latvians, and come to think of it, I did not like too many people. I yelled at my children a lot. And if you meet people who seem to yell a lot without any rhyme or reason, realize that they are very good victims. I had no intention of forgiving anybody, and nothing really happened until my sister died. I came home on a Sunday afternoon from a real estate open house. There was a message on my answering machine on June 6, 1993. It stated, "I'm sorry to inform you, but your sister died." I immediately called Israel, told my brother-in-law that I must come to the funeral, I have never buried any member of my family. And he said, well, the funeral is in 10 hours. Israel is 7 hours ahead. There is no way you can make it. I pleaded with him, but he didn't want to listen. So I was left with a lot of pain. Not only did I want to say goodbye to my sister, I wanted to also say goodbye to my kidney that she was taking with her. So I was left with tremendous nightmares. For the next month, I would wake up every night unable to breathe as Miriam died because the cancer filled her lungs. I knew one thing, that I would do something in her memory because that is my way of coping with pain. And so 2 years later, I opened Candles Holocaust Museum in Terre Haute, Indiana. About a month later, I received a telephone call from a professor at Boston College, unrelated to Miriam's death. He knew nothing about it. He said to me, I am going to invite you to Boston to give a lecture about Nazi medicine, and I want you to lecture to some doctors about Nazi medicine. And I said, wonderful, I just love to lecture to doctors. And he said, really? I said, yes. He said, why is that? I said, well, I go to the doctors and the doctors tell me I'm too fat, which is true. I eat the wrong food, correct. I am not exercising enough. Well, with my 2 hips being replaced, I cannot do much exercise. And after they chew me out, I have to pay them. So I told Dr. Mihalchik that I would like to tell the good doctors what they do wrong, because in my opinion, doctors do plenty of things wrong. And after I chew them out, I really look forward to them paying me. In a strange way, getting even with the doctors is getting even with all the doctors, including Mengele. And that is the reason. So he said to me, okay, Eva, when you come to Boston, it would be really nice if you could bring with you a Nazi doctor. Wow. I said, where on earth do you think that I can find one of those guys? Last time when I looked in the yellow pages, they were not advertising there. So he said, you like to joke a lot. He said, think about it, and maybe you come up with some kind of an idea, and I did. The last project that Miriam and I worked on together was in 1992, a documentary done by a German television. And in that documentary about the Mengele twins, there was a Nazi doctor from Auschwitz. His name was Hans Munch. And I thought he might be still alive in 1993. So I faxed a letter to the German television network. Their name is TDF. And I asked them to please give me Dr. Munch's telephone number in the memory of Miriam. And an hour or so later, they faxed me a letter back. With that, we contacted Dr. Munch, invited him to the Boston conference. He said he wasn't coming to the Boston conference, but he was willing to meet with me at his house in Germany. From that moment, I stopped having nightmares. I was having a different nightmare. I was tremendously worried about going to meet a Nazi doctor. What I remembered about Nazi doctors wasn't anything that I was really willing to experience again. But I was curious, maybe Dr. Munch knew something about our experiments. And I was curious, why was this Nazi doctor willing to meet with me? We arrived at his house with my friends and 2 camera crews from Holland. And he treated me with the utmost respect, kindness, and consideration. But he said, unfortunately, he knew nothing about our experiments because Mengele always said that this was top secret and he never shared any of it. He gave me a good interview for my Boston conference, and then, out of the blues, even though the film said that I have been thinking about it for years, incorrect. While Bob Hercules and Sherry Pugh did a wonderful job, I don't think they really knew how to tell my whole story, or it might have made the film too long. I don't know. And I, out of the blues, asked Dr. Munch if he knew anything about the operation of the gas chamber. And he said immediately, this is the nightmare that I live with every single day of my life. To me, it is amazing that the only Nazi doctor I have ever met was stationed many times outside the gas chamber looking in through a peephole. He said people would be going into the shower room. The shower room was cleaned. They would spread a lot of perfume, and people were looking forward to taking a shower. Once the shower room was packed, the doors would close hermetically. Dr. Munch was stationed outside looking through a peephole. He said the gas did not come from the shower heads. The shower heads were there strictly as a camouflage. Instead of that, Zyklon B looks like pellets of white gravel. They were packed in canisters, and a hatch opened in the roof. The canisters were opened, and the content dropped inside the shower room, fell to the floor. It operated like dry ice. It was rising. People, as the gas was rising, they were trying to get away from the rising gas, climbing on top of each other. It became a little mountain of intermingled bodies. He knew, as he watched from outside, that when the people on the top of the pile all stopped moving, everybody was dead, and he signed one death certificate. Never any names, of course, just the number of people who were murdered. 500, 1,000, 2,000. I have never ever heard about it, read about it, or knew anything about it, and I found it amazing. I told him immediately that this was very important information and that I was going to Auschwitz on January 27, 1995, and I wanted him to go with me, sign a document at the ruins of the gas chamber in the company of witnesses so nobody could say he didn't sign it. And he immediately said to me that he would love to. So I got back to Terre Haute, Indiana, very excited that I will have an original document signed not by a survivor, not by a liberator, but actually by a Nazi who witnessed it. And I wanted to thank him, but I had no idea how to thank a Nazi doctor. I didn't even know where to look. So I went to the local Hallmark shop. Well, where would you start? I went to the section of thank you cards. I didn't really think that I would find a card appropriate for a Nazi doctor, but I thought if I would read lots of cards that I would immerse myself into the whole idea of thank you. I read cards for 2.5 hours. 2 ladies came up to me and said, "You've been reading those cards for a long time. Are you finding anything that you're looking for?" I said, "Not really." They said, "Would you like us to tell us what you're looking so we could help you find it?" I said, "No, thank you very much," and I left the card shop. But I could not give up the idea of finding a meaningful gift or thank you for this Nazi doctor. So I went back to my life lesson number 1, never ever give up. For the next 10 months while I was cooking, cleaning, doing the laundry, or driving the car, when my mind wasn't too busy, I kept asking myself, how can I thank this Nazi doctor? What can I give this Nazi doctor? Lots of ideas popped into my mind. None of them were appropriate until 10 months later, there was a simple idea. How about a letter of forgiveness from me to Dr. Munch? I immediately knew that this was a meaningful gift. But what I discovered for myself was life-changing. I discovered that I, the little guinea pig from Auschwitz, had the power to forgive. No one could give me that power, and no one could take it away from me. And as I lecture here, I want to remind you all that every single one of you here has the power to forgive. No one can give it to you. No one can take it away from you. It's yours to use in any way you wish. So I began writing my letter of forgiveness, and I had no idea how to write one. It took me 4 months before I was content with the content of this letter, and then it occurred to me that somebody might read my letter, and my spelling in English is atrocious. Let's be honest, English is a beautiful, rich, and very difficult language. So I called my former professor from ISU, asked her to meet with me to correct my spelling, and we met about 3 times. And the 3rd time we met, she said, Eva, that's very nice that you're forgiving this Dr. Munch, but your problem is really with Dr. Mengele. I tried to debate that issue. She said, I know that this is just a little letter, but do me a favor. When you go home tonight, pretend that you are talking to Dr. Mengele and tell him that you forgive him, because I want you to realize how it will make you feel. I tried it, and I said, you son of a gun, no good, Dr. Mengele. I called him every name in the book. In spite of that, I forgive you. And I said, wow, I really do have the power even to forgive the God of Auschwitz. I am not hurting anybody, so then why couldn't I do it? And if I forgive Mengele, who was the worst of the worst, I might as well forgive everybody who has ever hurt me. And that is the way we arrived in Auschwitz. Dr. Munch came with his children. I went with my children, my son Alex and my daughter Rina. Dr. Munch signed his document. I read mine and signed it, and I immediately felt that all the pain I carried around for 50 years was lifted from my shoulder. I was no longer a prisoner of my tragic past. I was no longer a victim of Auschwitz. I was free of Auschwitz, and I was free of Mengele. Forgiveness, in my opinion, is nothing more and nothing less but an act of self-healing, self-liberation, and self-empowerment. I met with some Holocaust scholars, and many, as you saw in the film, survivors are against me. And just last year, I met with a Holocaust scholar who came up to me and gave me a hug and a kiss. And I said to him, so you agree with my forgiveness? I said, oh, no, 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 no. He said, Eva, you do not understand it. According to Jewish tradition, the perpetrator must repent and ask for forgiveness. Wow, I said. You mean that I should be waiting, or do you think that that will happen even if Hitler and Mengele were alive, that they would repent and ask for forgiveness? said, that's absurd. And what if they do not repent? What does it mean for me? Do I remain a victim for the rest of my life? I said, I refuse to be a victim. The truth is that the forgiveness is not for the perpetrator. The forgiveness helps the victim just like it helped me liberate, heal, and empower. For anybody who wants revenge against people who have wronged you, I want you to know that forgiveness is the best revenge. Because from that moment on, the perpetrators have no longer any power over you. Congratulations, you survived my lecture. You are free. Thank you all. You have been a wonderful audience. If there are any questions, I just want to share with you and those people who left. I'm sorry that they left, but maybe you tell them. Go to our website. On our website is www.candlesholocaustmuseum.org, or just Google Eva Kor. The first thing will come up will be Candles Holocaust Museum. There is a paragraph, it's called Events and Programs. Click on it. Then you will find another paragraph, Eva Chat. You can click on them. There are 4 programs, and I am going to do more, dealing with forgiveness, with prejudice, with my, I appeared on a program called, what is that called? I forgot. It was with tweeting. It's an international program. I forgot. It doesn't pop into my head. But it deals with tweeting. And I have a tweet that I read. One of the tweets is very simple. It says, forgiveness creates a feeling of wholeness in thought, spirit, and action, moving together, creating a force for healing, liberation, and empowerment. And if you realize why forgiveness creates a feeling of wholeness, I am not divided against myself. People always say, where did you get all that power? It comes from forgiveness. I am at peace with myself, just like some of your advertising said. Every good and every bad idea, and I tweeted that also, start in the mind and heart of one person. I choose peace, forgiveness, and healing. And if many people do not like that idea, I prefer peace, because I learned one very simple thing, that you cannot run away from yourself. And those who try to run away from themselves end up in a lot of trouble. So I want you to do that for your own benefit if you are interested in more information. Okay, let's have some questions.
We've got, I think, 2 mics set up over here. We've got 30 minutes for some questions and answers. After that, I'm going to walk Eva to the back to the book selling station, where she will give autographs and pictures and sign your book, whatever you would like. We do know that a lot of people have schedules besides just us, but if anybody would like to come up to one of these microphones, we see somebody over here, and that's how it's going to be. I think Tom Steiner's over there with our first question.
Thank you, Eva, for coming. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Can you hear him?
Can you hear?
More or less.
More or
I
less.
don't even know where you are.
How about now?
All right, very good. Now I can see you too.
Okay. I've got a question. Most Holocaust survivors have turned their back on God because they feel He abandoned them. How do you feel about God?
I don't think that they turned their back on God. I think that I can tell you one thing, that I was very, very religious when I arrived in Auschwitz. And when I saw those dead bodies on the latrine floor, the little religious girl had to change, throw all the past away, because as a 10-year-old, I could not decide what I could eat. I wouldn't eat the food there. So I had to abandon everything and become a survivor. So that is my coping way. That does not mean you can meet survivors. I met many of them who are very religious, and they say that their belief in God helped them survive. So what I can explain to you is the coping mechanism of every human being is quite different. Whatever helped us survive. So that is why I am not religious, but I do believe in God. I just want a debate when I go up there.
Thank you.
What do you think we take most for granted?
Let's get this other mic turned up.
Okay.
What do you think we take most for granted?
Say that again.
What do you think we take most for granted?
That you take most for granted? Freedom. Do you realize how many Americans don't even go to vote? It's a disgrace. You do not have the faintest idea how important freedom is. We help many other countries trying to gain democracy and have the right to vote, and we are not voting here. Well, then look at the country and how much trouble we are in. And those people who have not voted, they cannot complain, because we could elect any president with the people who didn't even go to the poll. But freedom is not free, and it's not automatic.
There's just a teeny tiny difficulty. And when you're going to ask a question, speak directly into the microphone so we can all hear. And you're next. Thank you.
You could not hear me?
No, we can hear you just fine.
There is an echo.
There's a generation of Jews that are entering adulthood now, and many of them are getting tattoos that are reminiscent of the tattoos that were put on the prisoners at Auschwitz.
Yeah.
Do you think that the people who are getting these tattoos, how do you feel about it?
Not because they remind me of Auschwitz. No. And I deal with Auschwitz very well. I go back every year. I'm going to go this summer, and every year I take people with me. That is not the problem. They mutilate their own bodies because they are spoiled brats. They must have food and freedom, so now they want to do some crazy thing. Tattooing your body, in my opinion, is not an accomplishment. Getting a degree in college is. And it's a fad. It's a crazy, stupid fad that young people in particular like to become part of it. I think we could start any fad in the United States. I wouldn't start tattooing. Okay, yes.
You're next.
I'm 10 too. How did you get through being departed from your mom? And
Would you repeat that? Raise your voice a little bit.
I'm 10 too. How did you get through being departed from your mom?
Oh, you are 10 years old?
Right.
How did I get through surviving without my mother?
Yes.
When you go to the website and look on Eva Chats, the one that deals with family, I have written 2 letters. And last summer, when we went to Auschwitz, I read them at the selection platform. It was the most difficult thing that I have done. I missed my mother every day of my life. She was a wonderful person, but as I said in the letter, you can see me read the letter for the people who will watch it. I was very thankful that I had my mother for 10 years. Life was very, very difficult. There was no one ever to really care for me again. And as a 10-year-old, I needed a lot of caring and help. And I never cried in Auschwitz because nobody cared. And if I concentrated on crying, I couldn't concentrate on living. And when I made the decision that I would survive, that was more important. I think all children in the world, and even grown-ups, one of the most traumatic things that happens to us to lose a loving parent. As a 10-year-old, I hope you have a loving mother. I also think it's an important question to ask. Enjoy your mother, respect her, be the best little girl, study, improve your mind. You already have a pretty good mind, improve it. Grow up to make your mother proud. But coping without parents is very, very difficult. And I want you to be aware. When I lecture at high schools and junior high schools, and in the film, you saw some people, students come up to me, and one of them was crying. Some come up to me and tell me that they don't have a loving mother or a mother, that the parents are divorced and they don't even know if they have a home. That is, to me, very, very tragic, that so many young people feel that they have fallen between the different problems in their families and they don't belong anywhere. So what I want, I sometimes tell young people as one of my life lessons, give your parents an extra hug and an extra kiss for all the children who had no parents to hug and kiss, and for all the children today who have no parents to hug and kiss. And if you have an acquaintance like that in your classroom, invite them to your house so they would experience some loving parents they desperately need. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for sharing your story with us today. I want to know, who did you live with in Romania after the war? And when you lived there, did you face any prejudice from the citizens that lived there after the war?
The last part I didn't understand.
In Romania, did you still face any prejudice against you after the war?
Very good, yes. My aunt, the younger sister, my father's younger sister survived Auschwitz, and she saw a list of returning survivors at the Jewish community center where she lived in a big city. And she knew exactly when we got back. She sent a cousin who also lost all his family. And he came to the village after Miriam and I were at the house for about 2 hours. rummaging through the house. Everything was gone. It was probably one of my saddest moments. And all I could find was 3 crumbled pictures on a bedroom floor. So we went to live with my Aunt Irena, and Aunt Irena was better than all the uncles and aunts who were still alive, because she at least was willing to give us a roof over our head. But Aunt Irena was not very loving or nurturing. I believe, I knew her from before that, and she was always very nice, but she lost her son, who was 26 years old. And she looked at Miriam and Mrs. little kids who survived and her son didn't. I think she resented that. And she was not able to give us any love. We lived with her and a man she married, my uncle, for 5 years in communist Romania. And what was the second part? What was the second part of your question?
If you faced any prejudice from the people living there.
In Romania, after the war, I want you to know that Romania used to be the food basket of Europe. They grew everything. There was tremendous poverty and tremendous hunger. Miriam and I, in order to get any nourishing food, we had to walk to the orphanage at night after school to eat the dinner there and bring home for breakfast milk and eggs, because you couldn't buy them. Well, we walked quite a distance, and there was a rumor in Romania, in our city, in Cluj, that there was a Jewish vampire who was roaming the streets in Cluj, and he was attacking people. Well, in my childish misunderstanding, I thought that that was true, but this was, of course, strictly an anti-Semitic rumor. And I thought, well, if he attacked me, how could I able to tell him that I am Jewish, so not to attack me? Well, there were a lot of rumors against Jews that they spread, the government spread. Also, many Jews who survived the camps were arrested and taken away. The man that my aunt married, who lost his family, he was arrested and put in jail for 2 years because he talked against the Communist Party. Actually, he spent his whole life working to bring communism to Romania. But once it was in power, he realized that the leaders were lying through their teeth. And he was one who really believed in the ideals. And he tried to expose them. So he was silenced and put in jail. But there were many other Jews who were arrested because they were rich. And communism arrested rich people because they supposedly exploited the poor people. That poor rich person idea, I hear about it a lot lately, and it brings back the memories of the communist rule in Romania. Ceausescu and all these communist leaders, or Stalin, they all lived in palaces. The rest of the people were poor. But I would say that the Jews did not exploit anybody. They worked hard. My grandfather came from Russia, from the pogroms, and he worked for a baron and invented a patent, worked in the winery, and that's the way he made his money. And that is the money that we have. So that was very difficult, that prejudice, they said equality and brotherhood, but there was no equality, there was no brotherhood, and there was definitely no freedom. Because I can tell you one thing, I ate a piece of bread on the back porch. And that day, we were turned into the police by a neighbor. How on earth did we have flour to have any bread? Because usually we stood in line for 8-10 hours to get a loaf of bread. And the inflation was so bad that sometime after 8 hours, the bread was hidden away. Nobody wanted to sell anything. But the Jews were immediately, in our case, they came into our house, the secret police, and confiscated our flour that we got from our farm. So my aunt told me never to eat outside again, never to talk in public, because somebody would turn us in. That is a fear under which we lived. When I arrived in Israel at age 16, for 6 months, I would never speak, even to friends, without making a complete circle to look around who was listening to me, because we were that scared. So that is all. Communism is filled with fallacy, lies, and oppression.
Thank you.
Your speech on forgiveness is really inspiring, but I have the question of what advice or knowledge do you have to give to those people that might be on the receiving end of forgiveness?
Where are they on the road to forgiveness? At the beginning or at the end?
Wait, what?
I didn't quite understand your question.
Okay, like the people that are on the receiving end of forgiveness, like if I wrong someone and I
have no advice for them.
Fair enough.
Well, see, the people who are forgiven, they should say thank you, but they also, in my opinion, that does not excuse their behavior. They have to take responsibility for their action, because my forgiveness does not necessarily free them, and I am not doing it for them. And that is basically, once they take, because I am a very, very good friend with Dr. Mengele's boss, who was a doctor in charge of our experiments, who were done by the most prestigious German scientific institution. His name was Vashur. His grandson is a very good friend of mine. And we have been friends since 1989. I immediately liked him. The guy did not know until he was in college that his grandfather was a Nazi who was involved with the Mengele thing and any of that. And when he found out, he became very interested in learning more and more. I think that every person has to take responsibility for anything wrong that they are doing and try to remedy it. I have received a telephone call some years ago from a woman who said to me, I have been very mean to my children, I abuse them. What can I do? I said, oh my God, I am not a therapist. Why on earth do you call me? But I said, I will use my little wisdom that I have. Write to them a letter every week, because they need to know that you are sorry and why you did it. Don't expect them to forgive you. You just do the right thing finally, and if they ever forgive you, or if you will ever have any relationship with them, that would be a miracle. But know that you know how wrong you were. You, at least for the sake of your children, apologize, ask for forgiveness, explain to them, tell them that you were wrong. So I think that is basically what I can say. Because the perpetrator, how do they remedy that? The biggest problem in Germany today is that many people feel guilty. And I tell them, you have not done anything wrong. You weren't even alive. Stop wasting your energy in feeling guilty. That doesn't help anybody. Instead of feeling guilty, do some good in the world. If you see a person who has difficulty crossing the street, help them. You see a neighbor who is old, get the paper, get their mail. Do something good. That will make you feel good. And I really, in my tweets I have, if you want, looking for happiness, find a cause, a good cause that is bigger than you are or any one person can be. Support that cause and it will make you feel wonderful and it will make you happy.
That was pretty good for somebody who said she didn't have any comment to that.
Okay.
I think we only probably have time for 2 more. I'm sorry. Is that all right?
Okay. You can come up to me and ask me a question. I'll try to answer it.
When
Not
we're
that long.
done-
Okay, I'll try to answer short. Just very short. Okay.
When we're done with the question answer period, I would ask you to stay in your seats. I'm going to take Eva to the back, so she'll be back there as people are leaving because I know a lot of people will want to say hi.
Okay.
Go ahead. Thank you.
All right, sir.
Hi. I have read a few accounts of other Holocaust survivors that were in Auschwitz, and at the end of their accounts, they mentioned that when the Russians arrived to the camp, that it wasn't very much different than when the Germans were there, the way that they treated them. Do you know if they showed any special treatment to Mengele's twins?
No, they didn't know who on earth we were. No. I would say that it was, I am sure it was different than the Americans. But we immediately were given food. I never was worried that they are going to take me for experiments. And I felt that just the fact that I could go into the camp and I could walk out was freedom, for me was very important. Now, I don't think that it's true. I was in refugee camps in the Soviet Union for 9 months. Their food was enough. They gave us enough food. They even gave us half a ruble every week to go to the open market in the nearby villages to get fresh fruit because they didn't have any. So I don't know what they experienced. The only thing that I can tell you, as our train was rambling toward Minsk in Belarusia, many people, we were in cattle cars, but the cattle cars were open-door cattle cars. People jumped out of the cattle car, and I didn't understand why they were jumping and what happened to them. Well, they were grown-ups who knew something about communism and Russia. I didn't know anything about it. So that is the only thing that those people who were grown up might have thought that to be in Russia, I think they treated us, from my experience, decently. I really have no complaints.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hello again. I listened to you earlier as you had a dialogue with a student who asked you about making friendships with the other twins in the camp. Would you share with us why it was so difficult?
That is a very naive and sweet question because people do not understand. Children, if you ever seen an abused child in your life, they are not very friendly. They are scared to death for their life, and they turn inward. Well, we were very scared of everything in our lives. We didn't trust the world, and the need to survive took up every ounce of my energy. There was no more energy in my life than to live one more day and help Miriam live one more day. And if you understand the mentality of children who are struggling to survive, you're going to understand that there is no room for friendship. Okay? Thank you. Thank you. You have been an outstandingly wonderful Orient.
Yes.
And I want to thank Stephen Robert for all his great work and putting all that together. It was magnificent.